Alright, so this video here we're going to look at uh, the square root property if we have a quadratic equation. So in order to use the square root property, we have to be able to get the quadratic into this form here. So if we have x squared equals some number, or and it doesn't necessarily have to be just x squared, it can be something squared equals a number, and you'll see in one of the examples what I'm talking about. So if we have something squared is equal to a number, then whatever was squared is equal to plus or minus the square root of this number here. Okay, so if you have a quadratic equation like, say, this, okay, for this you cannot use the square root property because of this term here with the x. You can only have the something squared and the constant term. So this would, we would not have, we can't have that x term in there. Okay, it just has to be something squared and a number. Okay, and so then we would just isolate the number. I'm sorry, isolate the squared term. We would have to move the 4 over here, and then we could apply the square root property. So let's look at our examples. I've got 4 examples to work. Alright, so here we have uh, x squared equals a number. So that's in the exact form that the square root property is in. So all this is x is equal to plus or minus the square root of 7. And this would be your answer. Okay, let's look at the second one. Now here it's not in that form x squared equals k. Alright, so what we need to do is isolate this squared term here. So I'm going to add 3 to both sides, and so that would give me 2x squared equals 3. Then I would divide both sides by 2, and so I get x squared equals 3 halves. Okay, so now I have it in this term, in this form here. So that means x is equal to plus or minus the square root of 3 halves. And then, as you know, we have to simplify the radical. So we can't have a fraction under the radical. So x is equal to plus or minus the square root of 3 over the square root of 2. We can split it up like that. Okay, remember your properties for radicals. Alright, so the next thing, we can't have a radical in the denominator, so we need to rationalize the denominator. So I'm going to multiply numerator and denominator by square root of 2 over square root of 2. And so I get x is equal to plus or minus, and then square root of 3 times square root of 2 is square root of 6 over, and then square root of 2 times square root of 2, well, that's the square root of 4, which is just 2. So I get plus or minus square root of 6 over 2. Alright, let's take a look. We've got 2 more to do. Alright, so here I have 3x squared plus 8 equals 0. So same thing, I need to get it in this form, x squared equals k. Alright, so I'm going to subtract 8 to both sides. So I get 3x squared equals negative 8. And then I'm going to divide both sides by 3. And so I get x squared equals negative 8 thirds. And so now I can apply the square root property because I have it in this form. And so I get x squared is equal to plus or minus the square root of negative 8 thirds. Alright, so x squared is equal to plus or minus. Now what I can do, since I have the negative underneath, we know that's I square root of 8 thirds. Okay, remember your complex numbers. And so now I can still simplify this. So that's x squared equals plus or minus I square root of 8 over square root of 3. Okay. Now the square root of 8, that will simplify. So that's x squared is equal to plus or minus I square root, and then 8 is 4 times 2 over the square root of 3. Alright, so x squared is plus or minus, now the square root of 4 is 2, so that's 2I, and then this 2 has to stay underneath, it's not a perfect square, over the square root of 3. Well, now I need to rationalize the denominator. I have to get this square root of 3 out. So I multiply numerator and denominator by square root of 3. And so I get x squared is equal to plus or minus 2I square root of 3 times square root of 2, square root of 6, over, and then square root of 3 times square root of 3 is 9, and the square root of 9 is 3. Now, this is my answer. Okay. Alright, last example. Alright, so here I have x minus 3 squared equals negative 24. Now remember what I said at the first of the video. It doesn't necessarily have to be x squared. It can be something squared. And that something in this case is the x minus 3 is squared. So it's in this form, x squared equals k. It's just in this problem, the x is our x minus 3. Okay, so this tells me that x minus 3 is equal to plus or minus the square root of negative 24. And so now let's simplify this square root of negative 24. So x minus 3 equals plus or minus, and then the negative underneath the square root, that's going to be I square root of 24. So x minus 3 is equal to plus or minus I square root. Now I need to simplify square root of 24. Well, 24 can be written as 4 times 6. See, 4 is a perfect square. So x minus 3 is equal to plus or minus. The square root of 4 is 2, so that's 2I square root of 6. And then I need to add the 3 to both sides. And so I get x is equal to 3 plus or minus 2I square root of 6. And this would be my answer. Alright, so I hope this helped. Give me a like, subscribe, share the video, and thanks for watching.